The moment you became easy to reach, you became easy to ignore. Not hated, not resented, ignored, which is worse. Because hatred at least means you registered. You were taught that giving freely, being available, showing up consistently, that these are the qualities that earn you loyalty, respect, influence. You were told that the more you offer, the more indispensable you become, that generosity is power. That is the lie they fed you. And the brutal truth, the one Machiavelli decoded 500 years ago in a cold Florentine exile, is that availability breeds contempt. Not immediately, slowly, the way water erodes stone. You will not see it happening. You will only notice one day that people have stopped considering what you want before asking for what they need. There is a difference between being valued and being needed. Valued means someone appreciates you when it is convenient. Needed means they cannot afford the cost of your absence. One keeps you around, the other makes you untouchable. This video is not about being liked. It is not about charisma or warmth or networking your way into rooms. This is about engineering your position, methodically, coldly, deliberately, so that removing you from any equation creates a vacuum no one else can fill. There are 5 phases to this architecture. The 5th one will explain why the people who hold power over you right now, your employer, your social circle, the institutions shaping your life, have been running this on you for years without you realizing it. If you are not ready for this, close the video. Go back to the crowd. But if you want to understand how power actually works, how it has always worked, stay. Phase 1. Scarcity is not a game. It is architecture. Most people confuse strategic scarcity with playing hard to get. They think making themselves less available means ignoring messages, running cold for no reason, manufacturing fake distance. That is not strategy. That is insecurity performing confidence. The average man makes himself accessible on demand because he was conditioned to believe that availability equals value. Respond quickly, it shows you care. Show up when called, it proves your loyalty. Never let someone wait. And so he trains every person around him to expect him at any hour for any request at 0 cost. When something costs nothing, it means nothing. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Men in general judge more by the sense of sight than by the sense of touch. What people perceive, or fail to perceive, shapes what they believe is true. When you are everywhere, they see surplus. When you are selective, they see power." The distinction is not in your actions. It is in the architecture of your presence. The psychological mechanism is what Robert Cialdini documented as the scarcity heuristic, the brain's hardwired tendency to assign higher value to what is rare or difficult to access. This is not a personality trait. It is a cognitive structure that you can design around, deliberately, with precision. Julius Caesar understood this before any behavioral economist named it. Before crossing the Rubicon, he did not flood Rome with letters justifying his position. He did not rush. He paused at the river. He let Rome's imagination do the work, create the dread, the speculation, the desire, before his body ever moved. The pause was the weapon. Starting today, introduce deliberate delay into your responses, not as manipulation, as a declaration of priority. You respond when you decide, not when the notification demands. Let people wonder what occupies you.
Let silence speak in a language louder than any explanation you could offer.
Because once you architect scarcity, the next phase cuts deeper, and most people never even know it exists. Phase 2. Create the problem before you offer the solution. 99% of people present their value by answering needs that already exist. They wait for someone to require help and then appear. That is reactive positioning. It makes you a tool, useful when needed, set aside the moment the job is done. The average man spends his life perfecting his answer. The sovereign spends his time shaping the question. Machiavelli's dark precision was this: the prince who creates the condition of instability and then resolves it does not merely become useful. He becomes indispensable, not because of his talent, because he controls the definition of what the problem even is. Robert Greene names the engine beneath this in the 48 Laws of Power. Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Before you can make someone need you, you must locate what they are already afraid of losing, the gap that exists between where they are and where they need to be. You do not invent the fear, you find the one already living in them, unspoken, half-acknowledged, and you position yourself as the only one who truly understands its depth. Napoleon ran this with surgical precision. He did not wait for France to call for a savior. He framed the chaos of the Directory, the threat of foreign invasion, and the vacuum of leadership into a single inevitable narrative, one in which his rise was not ambition, but necessity. France did not choose Napoleon. France convinced itself it had no other option. That is the difference between seizing power and engineering consent. In every relationship, professional, strategic, personal, ask one question before you offer anything. What does this person fear losing that they have not yet said out loud? Then position yourself not as someone who can help them, but as the only one who genuinely understands the problem at its roots. You are still here. Good. The fragile ones already left. Comment below. I engineer necessity. Phase 3. Make your absence feel like collapse. Value is not what you give. Value is the gap you leave when you are gone. The average man spends his entire career proving worth through presence. Early arrival, late departure, over-delivery, 0 refusals. And then he is the first cut when the institution needs to reduce. Because everyone knew precisely what he did. He was transparent, predictable, replaceable. The cost of losing him was calculable. The sovereign operates with deliberate opacity. He keeps critical portions of his value invisible. Not all of it, that is, incompetence, but the architecture of his contribution is known fully only to him. The specific relationships, the knowledge channels, the informal systems that hold things together, these are not documented freely. They are held. This is the principle of information asymmetry, central to game theory and organizational behavior. When one party holds knowledge the other cannot access, the balance of power tilts permanently toward the one who holds it. This is not paranoia. This is structural physics. Cosimo de' Medici built the most powerful financial dynasty in Renaissance Italy, not through transparent ledgers and open books, but through networks of obligation that existed only in his own mind. Private relationships, undocumented arrangements, favors extended and never formally acknowledged. When he died, the entire Florentine banking system seized. The knowledge was not transferable. He had not built a business, he had built a dependency.
Identify 3 things you currently do, professionally or personally, that no one else fully understands. Do not document them completely. Do not teach them casually. Create a quiet awareness in the minds of those around you that your absence would produce a break no one else could repair. And if this feels ruthless, what the next phase does to the people who believe they understand reality will disturb you more. Phase 4. Become the author of their reality. Whoever controls the frame controls the conclusion. The average man reacts to narratives that others create. He defends, explains, justifies. And every time he does, he confirms that the other person's frame is the valid one to argue against. Defense is not neutral. Defense is submission dressed in words. Machiavelli wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." Not deception in the crude sense. In the strategic sense, the management of perception before reality is even allowed to speak. The psychological foundation is what researcher Dan McAdams called narrative identity. The human mind does not experience events. It experiences stories about events. Whoever speaks first, frames most convincingly, and ties the narrative to the listener's existing fears and desires becomes the author of their version of reality. Not by lying, by precedence. King Philip IV of France used this to erase the Knights Templar, an organization with more wealth and international leverage than the French throne itself. He did not fight them militarily. He narrated them into destruction. He controlled the story of their supposed crimes before any trial, before any public discourse, before the Templars themselves understood what was being built around them. By the time they recognized the frame, they were already inside it. They were not defeated on a battlefield. They were narrated into obliteration. In every conflict, every negotiation, every conversation with stakes, speak first, calmly. Frame the situation from your perspective before the other party can establish theirs. Use language that presupposes your interpretation as the baseline. Given that we both understand the situation is X, and watch how rarely anyone corrects the premise. Because there is one final phase, the only one that makes everything else permanent.
Phase 5. Create obligation without naming it. The deepest form of power is not fear, not admiration. It is the quiet, invisible chain of obligation, the kind the recipient does not recognize as a chain. The average man gives and waits for reciprocity. He helps and expects help in return. He loans goodwill like a banker calculating interest. And because the exchange is explicit, both parties name it, the other person can repay it and walk free. Debt settled, power gone. The sovereign gives in a way that cannot be repaid. He creates situations where his contribution is so woven into someone's outcome that acknowledging the debt would require that person to diminish their own achievement. The help is real. The obligation is invisible. And because it is invisible, it is permanent. This is the engine beneath Robert Greene's entire architecture of power. Make others feel that their success is their own, while you remain the unseen foundation beneath the throne.
Cosimo de' Medici's patronage of Brunelleschi, Donatello, and Ficino was never positioned as investment. It was positioned as generosity, as love of culture, as the act of a grateful citizen. The recipients became his ambassadors without knowing they were deployed. Every monument they built was a monument to Medici influence. They believed they were being supported. They were, in fact, being leveraged. and the leverage outlasted the man by centuries. The next time you help someone with influence, a colleague, a contact, anyone whose position matters, do not call in the favor immediately. Let it age. Let it sit unnamed in the space between you. The longer it sits, the heavier it becomes. One day, you will not need to ask for anything. They will offer, because they have been carrying the weight of the imbalance without knowing its name. Now you need to hear what this costs, because if you pursue this path, this cold architecture of necessity, this deliberate engineering of dependence, you will win in ways that matter, and you will lose things you did not know you valued until they are gone. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. Not the peace of solitude, the silence of separation. People around you will respond with something between respect and unease. Very few will ever be fully comfortable in your presence. The wolf does not run with the flock, not because he cannot, but because the flock knows what he is. Is that a price you have considered? Or have you been telling yourself you can have both the power and the warmth?
Machiavelli himself, the man who mapped power more precisely than any political thinker before or since, wrote The Prince while in exile. He had served Florence for 14 years, had been its diplomat, its strategist, its architect of foreign policy. When the Medici returned to power, they stripped him of everything, threw him in a cell, tortured him on the rack. He did not break. He went to a small farm outside the city and wrote. Every evening, he changed into his formal court robes, alone, before sitting down to work. He was performing a ritual of dignity for an audience of none. And what emerged from that cold, stripped exile was a document that changed the architecture of political thought for 5 centuries. The men who exiled him are historical footnotes. His name is a concept. No one can exile what lives entirely inside your mind. No one can strip what you have never placed in their hands. This freedom is cold, but it is the only freedom that is truly yours.
You made it to the end. Most people left at phase 2. The rest disappeared at the dark mirror because the price was stated plainly and they were not willing to pay it. You are still here, which means you already suspected that what they taught you about worth, about giving, about making yourself available to the world was incomplete. That the rules operating beneath the surface were different from the ones handed to you. You were right. This channel is not for everyone. It is not designed to be. It is for the outlier, the one who has stopped performing warmth for people who mistake kindness for weakness, stopped shrinking to make others comfortable, stopped operating inside frameworks built to keep them manageable. Subscribe, not because I asked you to. Subscribe because you are done being prey. And if you want to go further, the mechanisms I cannot publish openly, the frameworks the algorithm penalizes, the tactical layers that go beyond anything covered in this video. That is what the membership exists for. The door is there. The choice has always been yours.